He didn't want the disabled alien fox girl until she whispered naked, "Touch me once." The medical bay smelled like antiseptic and something else he could not name when Kyle first saw her lying on the examination table. She was small for her species, with fur that shimmered between copper and silver in the artificial light, and those ridiculous ears that twitched at every sound made her look more like a wounded animal than the dangerous warrior her people were known to be. Her left leg ended, just below the knee, wrapped in strange bandages that glowed faintly blue, and her breathing came in shallow gasps. Dr. Laura Morrison stood beside the table checking readings on a floating display, and she barely glanced at Kyle when he entered. "This is Mira? She is from the Catherine fleet that crashed near Sector 7 and she needs a place to recover." Kyle crossed his arms and leaned against the doorway, taking in the fox-like alien with her delicate features and those eyes that watched him, with an intelligence that made his skin prickle. "I run a cargo ship, not a hospital," Laura finally looked at him, and her expression was flat and unamused. "The colony is full and every medical facility is overbooked, and Mira cannot go back to her people because they consider physical disability a weakness and they will exile her or worse." Kyle felt something twist in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. "That is not my problem." Myra spoke then, and her voice was soft but clear. Despite the pain that tightened her features, "I will not be a burden human. And I can work and I can repair systems and navigate through ion storms that would tear your ship apart." He wanted to say no. And he wanted to turn around and walk away because he did not need complications in his life. And he certainly did not need an alien with a death wish trying to prove herself on his ship. But there was something in her eyes that reminded him of himself years ago when he had lost everything and everyone told him he was finished. "Fine, and she can stay until she heals and then she finds somewhere else to go." Laura nodded, and already moving to prepare Mira for transport, and Kyle left before he could change his mind. The first week was harder than he expected. Mira moved through his ship like a ghost, and silent and efficient and never asking for help. Even when he could see her struggling with the stairs or reaching for tools on high shelves, she slept in the cargo bay on a thin mat and refused the spare cabin he offered, and she worked on engine repairs during the day and disappeared into the shadows at night. Kyle tried to ignore her, but that became impossible when she saved their lives during a pirate ambush in the Outer Rim. The ship had been surrounded and outgunned, and Kyle was ready to surrender the cargo when Mira appeared on the bridge, and her fingers flying over the weapons console with a speed he had never seen. She rerouted power and fired a sequence of shots that disabled 3 ships in under a minute, and then navigated them through an asteroid field that should have been impossible to traverse when they were safe. And Kyle found her in the cargo bay and collapsed against a wall, and her breathing ragged, and her prosthetic legs sparking from the strain. He knelt beside her and not sure what to say or do. "You could have died." She looked at him, and her amber eyes reflecting the dim lights. "Better to die useful than live as nothing." Something broke inside him then, and some wall he had built around himself after losing his crew and his family. He started bringing her meals and checking on her repairs and even offering to help, though she usually refused, but slowly. And she began to talk to him and telling him about her world and her people and the war that had taken her leg and her status. The Catherine believed strength was everything and physical perfection was a mark of worth. And when she lost her leg in battle and she became invisible to them and a reminder of weakness, they could not. Except Kyle listened and understood more than she knew. One night after a particularly difficult supply run, and Kyle found Mira standing in the observation deck and staring out at the stars, and her tail wrapped around her waist, in a gesture he had learned meant she was upset. He approached slowly and giving her space. "You okay?" She did not turn. "And you saved my life and you gave me purpose when my people threw me away, and why?" He stepped closer and close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her fur. "Because you remind me that broken does not mean worthless." She finally looked at him, and tears shining in her eyes. "I am not broken human, and I am healing." He reached out and hesitating, and then gently touched her shoulder. "I know what happened. Next was not planned." She turned toward him, and her body pressing against his, and her face tilted up, and before he could think, and she kissed him. It was desperate and hungry, and filled with months of loneliness and fear and need. Kyle responded, and pulling her closer and his hands tangling in her soft fur, and she made a sound that was half gasp and half purr. They stumbled toward the wall, and Mira pulling at his clothes with trembling hands. And when she whispered against his ear and her voice, raw and vulnerable, and it shattered the last of his resistance, touch me once and make me feel real again. He did. Her body was different and alien and beautiful in ways he had never imagined, and she was strong despite her injury and fierce and present, in a way that made everything else disappear. Afterward they lay tangled together on the floor of the observation deck, and the stars wheeling overhead. And Mira traced patterns on his chest with her clawed fingers. I did not think humans could want. Someone like Mekil caught her hand and pressing it against his heart. I did not think I could want anyone again. She smiled, and it was the first real smile he had seen from her, and it transformed her face into something radiant. We are both fools. Then he laughed and pulling her closer. Maybe, but they were fools together, and that made all the difference. The days that followed were different. Mira moved into the spare cabin, and they worked side by side, and her knowledge of alien technology complementing his experience with human systems. They talked about everything and nothing, and Kyle learned about Catherine courtship rituals and family structures, and Mira laughed at his terrible attempts to understand her language. At night they found comfort in each other and learning the geography of unfamiliar bodies and discovering that desire transcended species when there was trust and affection. But peace never lasted long in the outer sectors. 3 months after Mira joined his crew and a Catherine warship appeared in their path and demanding that Kyle surrender the exile who had stolen military secrets. Kyle stood on the bridge, and Mira beside him, and her hand resting on the weapons console. I did not steal anything, and I memorized tactical information before they could erase it from my mind, and information that could save lives. The Catherine commander appeared on the view screen, and his fox-like features twisted with disgust. You are a stain on our honor, and return now and face judgment, or we will destroy you. And the human who harbors you. Kyle looked at Mira and saw the fear in her eyes, but also the determination. He turned back to the screen. She is under my protection, and if you want her, and you will have to go through me, the commander snarled. So be it. The battle was brutal and fast. Mira coordinated their defenses while Kyle piloted through weapons fire, and they moved like they had been doing this for years instead of months. But the warship was too strong and too well armed. Just when Kyle thought they would not make it, and a fleet of human ships dropped out of hyperspace and led by Captain Monroe, and an old friend who owed Kyle more favors than he could count. The Catherine warship retreated and outgunned and outnumbered. The silence that followed, and Mira turned to Kyle and her eyes wide. You called for help. He shrugged and trying to look casual. Despite his racing heart, I protect what is mine. She launched herself at him and wrapping her arms around his neck and her tail curling around his waist. I am yours then. He held her tight and breathing in her scent. And I am yours later. When the adrenaline faded and they were alone in their cabin and Mira asked the question he had been dreading, what happens now? Kyle pulled her onto his lap and his hands gentle on her hips. We keep flying and we keep living and we figure it out together. She kissed him slow and deep. Together sounds perfect, and it was.